Hey everybody, welcome to Unit 4, Day 2. Today we're talking a lot about several very big topics. We are continuing through this revolution of 1800 and the Democratic Republicans being in power. And today we're going to focus on the presidencies of James Madison and Monroe, who were both very good friends of Thomas Jefferson and both Virginians. Now you're going to see James Madison at the beginning of his presidency. He does inherit a little bit of a mess from Thomas Jefferson with the Embargo Act. Because remember, we're still having the issue of everything going over in France with the French Revolution. That had caused headaches for George Washington, that had caused headaches for John Adams, that had caused headaches for Thomas Jefferson as well, and it's going to be James Madison's problem again. So you have the French Revolution happen, you have the Embargo Act that you read about happening last class, which had really hurt the U.S. economy, but if you look at the presidents during this time, it's really like their hands are tied in what can we do, because the French and the British are fighting in the French Revolution, and they're dragging us into it and basically taking advantage of us and our shipping as a result of that. So because of the French Revolution and because of some of the issues that we were having, that is going to pull us into what is going to lead to what many people know as the Second American Revolution, and that would be the War of 1812. Now, it's called the War of 1812, even though it was fought in 1812 to 1814. Don't know why. Historians have interesting ways of naming things sometimes. So, War of 1812. Now, the interesting thing about the War of 1812 is that it technically shouldn't have even been fought. The British agreed to back off of our shipping stuff. Basically, what they had been doing is taking over our ships and taking our sailors. And they had actually agreed to back off of that, but the word did not reach the United States until we had already declared war. You're also going to see at the end of the War of 1812, after the Treaty of Ghent is signed, you're probably going to have the most successful American battle of the War of 1812 won after the war was already over. So that delay in communication from one side of the Atlantic to the other leads to some interesting historical oddities there happening. So, War of 1812, really nothing spectacular with the War of 1812. There's some historical footnotes like the British burning Washington, D.C., including the Capitol and the White House during this. And really, you're going to see with the War of 1812, it really showed kind of how outmatched we were fighting against the British again. Remember, British, even though they lost to us in the American Revolution, they still are the dominant world power during this time. And we, just like John Adams had said during his presidency, we are not prepared as a country to go to war against these European powers. And that would be why John Adams would push so hard for us not to go to war against the French and not to get involved in there, because he said, look, we are not prepared for that. And really, the War of 1812, we weren't prepared for that as well. And so what was the big cause of the War of 1812? Again, British interference in our shipping. They were doing something called impressment, where they would come aboard American vessels, and basically what they would do is take sailors and say, hey, you're part of the British Navy now. Now, there is a little bit of a caveat to that. Because the Americans, we kept trying to trade with both the British and the French, you did have some sailors from other countries who would take and fly an American flag from their ship and say that they were American sailors. So sometimes some of this impressment that we thought was happening to Americans was actually not happening to Americans. It was happening to people who were representing themselves as Americans because they wanted to trade with the British and the French during their war. So you got impressment, and then Western expansion continued to be an issue. Remember, after the American Revolution, the British actually still had forts in the West here. And during those corresponding years, you're going to see that we were still enduring attacks from the Indians. A lot of people felt like that the native attacks were being prompted by the British. Whether that is true or not, it looks like for the most part, it's not true that they weren't telling the Indians that you need to do this, but at the same time, you're going to see a lot of Americans got the impression that that is what was happening. So Americans were already upset with the British. So War of 1812 happens. Again, I kind of filled in some of the major gaps there for you. And really it ends when both sides realize, like, why are we still fighting this war? Like, what is the point of fighting this war? And that's really what it ended up being, is both countries kind of being like, we don't need to fight anymore. Now, this does have some important results. You are going to get some war heroes coming up this war, such as Andrew Jackson, who most famously wins the battle after the war is over in the Battle of New Orleans. You're also going to see that there are more land claims for the United States in the West, especially the Oregon Territory. You're going to see the United States would start to take claim to that. As far as the War of 1812 goes, if you're trying to say like, hey, America is the definitive winners of that, you cannot say that really because all sides involved in it claim victory in it. We claim victory because, the British weren't on forts here anymore. We started claiming land from them and that kind of thing. The Canadians, they claim victory because the Canadians had been part of the force that went and burned Washington, D.C. So they felt like that they had accomplished something in this. And you could say the British say that they won because they marched into Washington, D.C. and burned it to the ground. So again, this war, very interesting war. There's a funny video that you're going to see here at the beginning that College Humor did about the War of 1812, because it is kind of one of those weird wars in history there. Another thing that happens during the War of 1812 is you're going to see the Federalist Party really shoot themselves in the foot. And the reason that they did so is because of the Federalists. Remember, the Federalist Party had been pro-British with their foreign policy. They were very upset about this war. And so what they would do is meet together in what was known as the Hartford Convention. And in this convention, they would talk about some changes that they wanted to make to the U.S. Constitution. And they would also threaten possible secession from the Union if things didn't go the way that they wanted. And one of the things that they did actually was they wanted to do a rotation of states for where the president could come from. Because if you remember, at this point, 4 out of the first 5 presidents had been Virginians. Virginia had an enormous amount of power, and they were upset with that. You would also see other things that they would want to do as well. And really, for the Federalists and the Hartford Convention to really go well, the war would have to go poorly. And because the war didn't end, even though technically we didn't win, it didn't go poorly enough. And really, it just left the Federalists looking like a group of very unpatriotic people. And really, it's going to lead to the death of the Federalist Party. And you'll see that the Federalist Party will kind of die off during this time. Another thing you're going to read about here is the Marshall Court. We talked about Marbury versus Madison last time, but you're going to see the Marshall Court really does kind of shore up what the court system in this country is going to look like, and they make the federal courts a truly equal branch of government within our 3-part government here. Marshall does greatly increase the power of the Supreme Court. Again, to Jefferson and others' chagrin, they were not very happy about him doing this, but he would. And you'll see him really defined through some decisions, McCulloch versus Maryland, which will put in place the idea of implied powers. Implied powers being that there are powers that are not listed in the Constitution, but that the government has the power to do, such as creating a national bank. And then another one, Gibbons versus Ogden. In that case, you're going to see the court intervene in an dispute between states over interstate commerce. And again, it really does define the power of the court. So you'll read through and read a little bit more about the legacy of John Marshall. And then lastly, the last big policy that you are going to see is the Monroe Doctrine. And I don't know if you remember reading at the end of Washington's presidency, he would give his farewell address. And in that, he warned strongly against entangling alliances. And you're going to see basically until World War I, that would be Americans' view on foreign policy is, hey, stay out of Europe's problems, it's their problems. And that's really what we try to do the first 100 plus years of this country is stay out of Europe's problems and focus on our own. And the Monroe Doctrine is going to be like an addendum to that whole idea. And the Monroe Doctrine, once it comes into effect, that will be our new foreign policy basically through World War I as well. Teddy Roosevelt would add on to the Monroe Doctrine. But really the Monroe Doctrine, what it boils down to is telling Europe, hey, stay out of North and South America. Like the Americas, they belong to us. We are groups of people that love republics and we don't love kings, and basically stay out of our business. And if you stay out of our business on this side of the world, we will stay out of your business over there. And really, it kind of fell in line with what George Washington wanted as well. But you've got to think about during this time, you're having an economic revolution as well. And America is looking for more trading partners. And South America, great place to trade. So that's going to be another motivation behind the Monroe Doctrine as well. So, I encourage you, again, read through the slides presentation. There are a lot of very big things that you need to understand that happen during this time and in these presidencies, especially with the foreign policy. You're also going to see like John Quincy Adams, his rise to power. He will be very influential in Monroe's presidency. And then, of course, he will go on to become president himself as well. So, have a great day. Enjoy reading through this and learning a little bit more about this Democratic Republican Revolution, known as the Republican Revolution, and reading a little bit more about the era of good feelings, which I didn't go into, but you'll read about in the slides presentation. So have a great day.